Welcome, everyone, to the Pediatric Success Podcast. Our goal with this offering is to give you fresh, new, and potentially game-changing insights into recommended practices centered around, well, your practices. While we know information doesn't always change the way we do things, we hope that it can bring about a pause, some thought, and maybe some change. I'm Shawn, Rosler, seasoned podcast host of the Course Grind podcast, parent of 3, partner to a genius nurse. I wear a lot of hats, to be sure. Sometimes you can only wear so many hats and have to bring in others to wear the other hats for you. Not to say I go around lending my hats, but you get the point. As our scope becomes larger, we need more people on deck to help us, also known as staffing. Meredith Cheryba is here again with me, co-host and parent extraordinaire. We're here again to talk about the topic du jour. And I have to wonder, Mer, how do you handle getting the right people on the right task?
Okay, well, I think, first of all, it's really sweet that you think I can handle that because, real story, my email signature reads like this. It says, Meredith Cheryba, she, her, hers, mama, Anagram 6, house coordinator. That's just going to need to be my new bio for podcast introductions because house coordinator is literally the hat that I use just to talk about all the things, right? And I think what I like about a topic around staffing so much is that this is something I really try to work in my personal network with over the last couple of months, specifically kind of getting out of this post-pandemic conversation. There's so many impacts coming and real awareness around this concept of mental load and invisible labor. For me specifically, I noticed it really weighing on women because they're juggling all the things in their personal calendars, professional calendars, trying to care for themselves. It had me really thinking as we prepared for today's conversation about what is that mental load, maybe that invisible mental load in a pediatric office, right? Someone has to order more toilet paper. Someone has to stock the plastic forks, empty the dishwasher. And if I got to the pediatrician's office and they didn't have stickers ready for after vaccines, I don't know what happened to my kids. So we know that there are real crucial elements to running a successful practice at the big level as well as in the smaller levels. And I think maybe there's got to be a stickers episode somewhere in here because post-vaccine rewards are a real thing that we need for our kids. But Okay, but Shawn, today I think we brought on a guest because we wanted to talk about, how do you find someone to wear all these different hats in the office? And I think we tend to think about staffing in a pediatric office at a big scale. Who are your doctors? Who are your nurses? Who are your front desk? And I think what's insane about talking about this the summer of 2021 is that this job market is unlike anything that's been seen for decades, right? And specifically in healthcare, there is a national impact of employee shortages because employees are getting job offers from larger health systems. That's pulling them out of private practices, out of their local communities. And I think pediatricians specifically have spent the last 18 months trying to find innovative ways to keep their staff engaged, keep them excited for the patients, but most importantly, employed. And after all of that work, now you might be getting termination notices from your staff.
Well, that is a great topic for sure, and I can't wait to dig into it. But we wouldn't be much of a podcast if we didn't bring a guest along for the ride. And one of my favorite podcast participants ever is joining us here today to talk staffing. Dr. Jeff Cooper of Cooper Pediatrics. Welcome to the Pediatric Success Podcast.
Well, thank you, Shawn.
So great to have you back. Now, I know folks who've listened to Pediatrics definitely know who you are. But just in case there's people out there who don't know who you are, can you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. My name is Jeffrey Cooper. 58. I'm married. I have 3 children and a grandchild. I've been practicing in my own practice for 29 years. We're in Duluth, Georgia, so sort of a suburb of Northeast Atlanta. And I guess that's who I am and what I do.
Awesome. That's who you are. That's what you do. Let's get right down to the theme of this show specifically, because I know it's near and dear to your heart, having spoken with you before. Stepping back, why is pediatric success important to Dr. Jeff Cooper?
Well, I think you would have to define pediatric success. I mean, for me personally, it's obviously my livelihood, so that's important. But it's more than that. It is meeting the needs of my families in a timely manner. And so if I'm going to be a successful and therefore a good pediatrician, I need to be able to do that. So it's just my passion. For years I wanted to be an obstetrician until I delivered my first baby, and there was this baby for me to dry off, and I thought, I'm doing that with the rest of my life.
Nice.
Best decision I ever made.
Clearly, you've had just immense success. That's
also
great.
amazing how there's like that one moment that flipped it for you, right? Like,
Yep.
You're in the delivery room thinking you're going to be on one side of the table, and now you're on the other side of the table. Like, it was just that one real life moment that completely changed your course.
That's it.
Well, this has nothing to do with staffing, but I told Shawn before, my mother was an OB nurse and always talked about it. And I wanted to be an obstetrician and would tell people I was going to be an OB for maybe 10 years. And when I delivered my first baby, I had just finished pediatrics rotation, and I was drying this baby, and I'm sucking out its mouth and checking its APGARs, and I'm doing all this stuff for this infant to resuscitate it. And the resident tugged on my scrubs and said, buddy, that's the pediatrician's job. You have a placenta to deliver. And I literally turned around and I looked at all the goo and slime, and I looked back at the baby and said, I'm doing that the rest of my life.
There you go.
Well, and you've built your practice, as you said, you've been practicing for yourself for 29 years. And now you're at the point where you have 2 physicians and 2 nurse practitioners. And I'd love to maybe learn a little bit more about, how did you build your team to 4 total care providers, and also all of your supporting staff, right? You live in a growing area. You said you're in Metro Atlanta. So obviously there's ongoing increasing patient volumes, the business needs are changing. What are some of the ways you've kind of grown and built your organization over the years?
Well, I mean, it has been a long process. I mean, when we opened the doors, I was the only provider. My wife was the front receptionist, and she actually typed out HCFA forms to mail them to insurance companies. And I had 1 nurse. And of course, we were on paper records, and my documentation was not nearly as thorough as it is today. But at some point, we got more and more busy, and I had to, and then we adopted a baby who literally we put in a bassinet and put in room 6 because we really weren't seeing a lot of patients. And my child slept like a child, like an infant. I mean, he was just a great napper. So he would sleep from 9 to 12 and then from 2 to 5. And we would put him in room 6 and let him sleep while I saw patients, and Lisa worked the front. But by the time he was 4 or 5 months old, that wasn't working so well, and we had to hire a receptionist. And then, a few months later, we had enough patient volume that I had to have a second nurse. And, my first nurse practitioner, as the business was growing, I hired a nurse practitioner who was incredibly slow, and I couldn't figure out why. And one time she spent an hour with a patient who had a positive strep test, and I'm like, what the heck are you doing in that room for an hour? And what happened was that she was so slow that the parents lost confidence that she knew what she was doing. And I had multiple conversations with her, and this was my very first extender, really. And I had multiple conversations with her about what the concern was. And then one day I saw her walking to the door trying to decide if she was going to take her umbrella with her to lunch. And she changed her mind 3 times. And I thought, this is the problem. She can't make a decision. And of course, I was taught 10 years before that the only thing a physician, and particularly a medical physician who's not a surgeon, the only thing we really get paid to do is to make decisions. Things like we have to find the information and we have to document the information, but we don't get paid to do that. We get paid to make the decision. And so I need everything to, workflow. I want my record to hand it to me. I want to be able to document it easily, because I am in there to make a decision. Everything else is meet and greet and warm fuzzies.
Yeah. I mean, and I mean, that really gets into the scenario where, time, we don't like to say it, but time truly does, become money and effort in all these things. And that really sets the stage for something I'm curious. Comparatively to the two of you, I'm definitely the newbie in the room. What happens when that person isn't meeting expectations, be they spoken or unspoken? Most often we hear about this with staff, clinical or front desk or billing. Have you ever had a situation where you've had to maybe let a team member go who wasn't, adding to your success, or even worse, maybe taking away from your success?
Well, sure. I mean, we've had that. And,
Mm-hmm.
Early on, I had to hire and fire every single person that came through the staff. And that is difficult. When somebody's not meeting expectations, you can sit down with them and make a corrective plan, either formally or informally. It's important to document that. And of course, the unemployment insurance rules are different for every state. But I mean, I had a nurse one time who she documented a strep test that mother and child swore was never done. And I went and talked to her about it, and she said, yes, she did it on that child. I was like, you didn't do it on another child? And I think a kid would remember if somebody put a Q-tip in their throat.
Mm-hmm.
Not a Q-tip, but a swab. And then, but the final straw was I was walking down the hall, and she was in the bathroom injecting her gums. And I said, what are you doing? And she said, oh, I have a toothache. And she was injecting xylocaine around her tooth. And
oh my God.
And I said, come with me. I said, I want you to put that in a sharps container. Give me your key. You're done. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, if she had a reaction, I would have been the one who got sued for malpractice. I was so over it.
Yeah.
You just have to document all those things. So there are very few people that I have fired on the spot. I had one who, was swearing at the front desk and with kids there. And I was like, go home, you're done. This is it. We've had conversations. Most of the time when someone's not performing well, though, I've been able to have a corrective plan.
Sure.
And even had them follow me around. I actually try about every year to 18 months to have my long-term nurse practitioners. I mean, one has worked with me 22 years.
Wow.
And so every year to year and a half, I have them follow me for a day, just like they were a student, mostly so that our style is in the same genre almost, that we're on the same page with how we treat patients. Although obviously I'm very, very comfortable with what she does, and the woman absolutely oozes reassurance to parents. So
I love that idea. I mean, one of the things when I work with pediatricians and they're asking for tips and tricks, it can be hard once you have somebody hired to make sure that they then stay in a good position. And so I love that idea of having somebody do some job shadowing so you can make sure that they're staying in the same pace as you, staying in the same, approach to difficult conversations. So I'm definitely going to steal that. What about, though, in those situations, like you mentioned, you had a front desk, you had to fire on the spot. And look, I know that's hard because you're in small offices. Most pediatricians are, right? Most pediatric practices have less than 5 total providers.
Right.
So these are families that you're talking about. You've built a community, you've built a family of employees. How do you then replace someone you've had to let go? Is there a website you use? Are there reference checks that you work with? Like, what's your process for finding that replacement staff?
Yeah, we do use references. We use a website, Indeed. I think my office manager has used Monster in the past, but we've had a little more success. I don't mean to be endorsing a website, but we use Indeed a lot. I have surprisingly found very good staff members through word of mouth. And I'm telling you, social media, one of the best physicians that ever worked for me worked part-time for 8 years. And I loved this lady. I found her through social media. I just said, I am looking for a part-time pediatrician. And the next day somebody called me and said, look, my neighbor I'd walk with her every morning. And anyway, this lady came to work with me, and I literally stayed here 8 years. She was great. Now, the problem with social media is you get people who think they're your best friend and that you're automatically going to hire them, and then they're not qualified, and you have to explain to them why you didn't place them.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the one drawback to that. So I'm not saying that's a panacea either.
No.
Well, you're right,
but it definitely does provide that visibility and mass visibility, maybe sometimes a little too much.
Right. I mean, it's sort of like crowdsourcing, you know, it's like if you have 1,000 friends and they all know, you know, personally 500 people, well, all of a sudden you've got a pool of 500,000 people that somebody's going to say, I know this pediatrician who's very unhappy or who's moving to Atlanta next week, you know, so you can find people that way.
But my guess is you also need to know what you're looking for to know when you don't see it, right? I like your point that just because someone is following you on social media or they're part of your personal network doesn't mean they're going to work out in your opening. But my guess is you have to be pretty clear with them to say, this is what I'm looking for in my biller, in my nurse practitioner. How do you make that really clear to them during the interview or during that first week or two? Do you have like a template that you follow? Do you have goals in mind of what your front desk should be accomplishing each day that you then know whether or not somebody's got it?
Well, we do have like job descriptions written down, and so we can go through that with them. And a lot of people will what's the word? They'll just eliminate them on themselves, say, well, this is really not what I'm looking for. I mean, I did I find a go-getter one time. I mean, honestly, like I tried to hire a guy who was working at the car wash one time to be my receptionist. He could work circles around, you know, two of the people here, and was well-spoken and polite and educated. And he laughed and he said, my father would kill me because his father ran the car wash, you know? So when I have needed people, I have just sometimes met people that I deal with every day. Hey, are you looking for a job? I'm looking for, you know, somebody with your qualifications. But, you know, most of that job up front can be taught to anybody who's, you know, of average intelligence. But there are warm fuzzies that I cannot figure out how to teach. I mean, one of my most brilliant people is very matter of fact and polite on the phone, right? But it comes across a little bit like, ma'am, what time would you like that appointment? 10 o'clock is not available. Would 10:30 work? I mean, it's just sort of this very matter of fact. But I've got another one who is just, when you listen to her from across the room, sometimes I've looked at her going, could I put that in a bottle? Parents love her. There's this, hi, how can I help you? Well, let's see. Okay, that's not available, but would 10:30 work for you? Because, you know, we have an opening there. And it's just, I don't know how to train that. And I really want to know how to screen for it.
Yeah, it's innate. I mean, I think you're spot on. I mean, because if you remove the wrong person, or if you find the right person, or somebody who can just support what you're trying to do, all of it at the end of the day is because you want a good experience for your parents. And that begins from their first call into the office, the first time they step foot, or even if someone's just wearing a Cooper Pediatrics t-shirt and they're at the grocery store, you want to make sure that they're representing you and your community really well. And I know, Dr. Cooper, you may not have had a chance yet to listen to one of these podcasts, but one of the favorite things we've been doing here is actually ending with a parent who is going to help kind of remind us why this all matters. And for today's parent response, I had several friends to choose from because I kept hearing over and over and over again about my friends who were driving 30 minutes or over an hour to find their pediatrician. And look, I live in suburban Philadelphia. There are plenty of choices. But when I asked them, why aren't you looking for someone in your town or somewhere closer? What they all said to me is, but it's the staff and the doctors that I love. And they're my extended family. They're my support system. And so, Shawn, if you can queue up for us, a friend of mine has answered again for us the question, why is it important to you that your pediatrician be successful?
Sure.
We love all the doctors and staff at our pediatrician's office. It's all women and they are all moms, so they can totally relate to us. I've never once felt funny asking a question or that my concern was not valid. They answer honestly, without being alarming and without being overly scientific. Plus, throughout the pandemic, the main pediatrician did Facebook Lives and took our questions and answered them honestly, even when she wasn't sure herself. We travel over 30 minutes to their office and wouldn't dream of changing for somewhere closer.
Well, I mean, I think that sums it up right there. I thought, I couldn't say it better. And as a parent myself, I totally agree. It's worth the drive. It's worth the effort. My youngest specialist is an hour away, and yet we still go for that reason. So just incredible. And Mayor and Dr. Cooper, thank you again for the awesome discussion today. It's always beyond a pleasure to chat with you. Folks listening, you can access the Pediatric Success Podcast on Office Practicum's website, as well as the official Office Practicum YouTube channel. We hope you've enjoyed this discussion and maybe learned a thing or two, either from the parental perspective or the practice perspective. It can certainly be a challenging landscape to traverse, but with patience, understanding, and most importantly, knowledge, it can be done, and more importantly, done well.
Absolutely, Shawn. Not only just patience, but also patience, right?
I see what you did there.
No, as always, if you have an idea for a guest or a topic, if you would like to be a guest yourself, please reach out to the show. We'd love to hear from you. Be well, stay safe, and remember, success is always a step away.